The movie takes place in the 80s. It starts with a man named George coming home after work. As he parks his car in the garage, blood suddenly drips onto the windshield from above. Shocked, George runs inside and finds his daughter staring at something. The next moment, we see him running through the fields, carrying his daughter in his arms. The story then goes back a few months. George lives in Manhattan with his wife, Catherine, and their daughter, Franny. During Franny's birthday party, George announces that he has finished his PhD and also got a teaching job at a private college upstate. Later, Catherine speaks privately with a friend, and we learn that she works as a skilled art restorer. Moving upstate would mean leaving her dream job, but she's willing to do it for George. He had been struggling for years and often borrowed money from his father, so she feels it's her turn to support him. The next day, the family moves into a big old farmhouse from the 19th century. It's filled with antique furniture and even has a lovely old piano. But strange things happen right from the first night. Catherine notices the smell of car exhaust, while Franny sees a chair move in her room, which scares her and sends her running to her parents. The following morning, George meets Floyd De Beers, the head of the art history department at the college. Floyd is fascinated by ghosts and the afterlife, so he gives George a book called Heaven and Hell by Swedish writer Emanuel Swedenborg as a welcome gift. Meanwhile, Catherine meets two local brothers, Eddie and Cole, who are looking for work. She hires Cole to babysit Franny and Eddie to help with house repairs. Later that night, while Catherine is working in the kitchen, she finds an old Bible with a family tree of the house's previous owners. It shows that the Smiths family once lived there, but some of the names are scratched out and marked as damned. Soon after, she notices strange lights in the kitchen that lead her to an antique ring. When she picks it up, she suddenly feels the presence of a spirit, leaving her shaken. The next day, Catherine visits the local historical society to learn more about the family. She discovers that a man named Jacob Smith and his wife, Ella, built the house and even finds an old photo of them. Meanwhile, George chats with a college girl named Willis at the library. Later, we see George pleasuring himself at home, showing that he is secretly attracted to her. As time passes, George becomes very popular at the college, admired by both students and teachers. He grows close to a fellow professor, Justine Sokolov, who teaches weaving. She compliments the paintings in his office, but George explains that he stopped painting long ago and now focuses only on teaching. That night, Catherine again smells car exhaust fumes in her room. George guesses it might be coming from the garage under their bedroom and promises to install fans the next morning. But Catherine, frustrated, goes down to fix it herself. While she works, the piano suddenly begins playing on its own. Terrified, she goes to check but finds no one there. At the same time, Franny sees a mysterious woman in her room and screams. She insists to her parents that it was a ghost, so Catherine takes her to stay with her. The next morning, Catherine finds the book Floyd gave George and starts reading it. She begins to sense a dark, supernatural presence in the house. Meanwhile, George goes out for a jog and runs into Willis, who is working at a nearby stable. Without saying much, she leads him to a room. George gives in to his desire, and the two end up sleeping together. After some time, George comes home with a wildflower for Catherine. She finds the gesture sweet, but when she puts on Ella's ring, her mood suddenly changes. She throws the flower straight into the trash, almost as if the ring is controlling her. On his way to work, George runs into Eddie, and they have a chat. We learn that Eddie and his brother once lived in the farmhouse until something forced them to leave. George already knows this but tells Eddie not to mention it to Catherine, fearing she won't be able to handle the truth. Later, when Catherine spends time with the brothers, she discovers that Eddie is talented at playing instruments and once wanted to study music in college. That night, George comes home to find Eddie playing the piano while Catherine listens happily. George feels jealous of their closeness but keeps quiet. Over the next few days, Catherine and Franny continue seeing the strange spirit at night. Even vultures begin circling the farmhouse, hinting at dark energy around them. Meanwhile, George is seen finishing another secret meeting with Willis. He looks pleased, but Willis is done with their affair. She tells him it's over and rides away on her horse, ignoring his pleas to continue. That evening, George and Catherine have dinner at Justine's house. George quickly bonds with Justine's husband, Graham, as they smoke weed together, while Catherine enjoys meaningful conversations with Justine. Before they leave, Justine invites Catherine to join her women's art group. Desperate for friendship, Catherine happily accepts. On the drive home, Catherine talks excitedly about Justine, but George mocks her. Since he's high, he drives recklessly, leading to a heated argument. Catherine storms out of the car and lashes out, saying she sacrificed her dream job for him. When George tries to force her back into the car, he shoves her and leaves her with a bruise on her face. George immediately regrets pushing Catherine and apologizes, but she stays silent. Later at home, he apologizes again, admitting that he hasn't cared enough about her needs. Still, Catherine shows little reaction. As their relationship grows colder, Catherine starts spending more time with Justine, while George buries himself in work. During a sailing trip with Floyd, George shares that he used to sail with his cousin Henry, a talented artist who tragically drowned at just 19. That evening, George invites Floyd to their home. When Floyd sees Catherine reading the Heaven and Hell book, he begins explaining the cover art, which shows the soul moving into the afterlife. Catherine then gives him a tour of the house, and Floyd immediately senses a female spirit. He assures her that the spirit means no harm and lingers there for a reason. Relieved to finally be believed, Catherine admits that although she was scared at first, she now feels strangely comforted by the spirit. She believes it to be Ella Smith, so Floyd offers to hold a seance in the house. The next evening, George and Catherine host a party for their neighbors and George's colleagues. At first, everything goes smoothly, and they finally share a joyful moment together. But then, Catherine learns from a neighbor that the farmhouse once belonged to Eddie and Cole's parents. Their father, Calvin, had been struggling with money and was very cruel to his wife, Ella. One night, he drugged his family and killed all their cows. Then he went into the garage below his and Ella's bedroom, started his 2 trucks with the windows shut, and returned to bed beside her until both of them died from the fumes. Catherine is horrified by this revelation and furious that George hid it from her. At last, she understands why their bedroom always smelled strange. Meanwhile, George smokes weed with Justine and takes sarcastic jabs at her, blaming her for putting ideas into Catherine's head. During the party, George suddenly grabs Justine's hands and holds them tightly, making her very uncomfortable. She angrily pulls away and storms out. That night, after the guests leave, Catherine confronts George about hiding the house's violent history. George claims he only wanted to protect her from unpleasant details, but Catherine doesn't accept his excuse. In the middle of their argument, the radio suddenly turns on by itself. Even after George unplugs it, the music keeps playing, so he angrily smashes it to pieces. The next day, George takes Franny to visit his parents, giving Catherine the chance to invite Floyd and his team to perform the seance. She shows them a picture of Ella, explaining that she has been seeing her spirit. To her surprise, Floyd thought the spirit was actually Jacob Smith's wife. He explains that Jacob's wife had been a follower of Emanuel Swedenborg's teachings. Their marriage was unhappy, and Jacob disapproved of her beliefs. She mysteriously died in the house at just 26 years old. Hearing about so many deaths in the house unsettles Catherine, but the seance group reassures her that having spirits in a home can be seen as a blessing. Catherine then places Ella's ring on the table, and they begin the seance. Suddenly, the candles go out and the table shakes violently. Ella's spirit appears, but soon, a male spirit's angry voice interrupts. He shouts at Ella, scaring her away. Afterward, Floyd concludes that another spirit lives in the house. He warns Catherine to be careful until the spirit reveals its true nature. The next day, Catherine visits the library to return some books. She also returns an overdue book she found in George's car. The librarian tells her the book was checked out under the name Willis. At that moment, Catherine realizes her husband is having an affair. Meanwhile, George takes his students on a tour of the Met Museum, with Justine tagging along. There, he unexpectedly runs into his PhD advisor, Dr. Warren, who is shocked to learn that George got a teaching job without his recommendation letter. Nervous, George lies, saying he's only a temporary instructor covering for someone else, but Warren looks doubtful. Justine overhears their exchange and starts to suspect something isn't right. The next day, Floyd, the head of the department, confronts George about the forgery. Dr. Warren had called him, confirming that he never wrote a recommendation letter. Cornered, George admits what he did but begs Floyd to let him explain. He pleads with him to wait until Thanksgiving break before making a decision. On Thanksgiving night, George's family comes over for dinner. During the meal, George's mother talks about how close he was to his cousin Henry, a gifted young artist. Henry used to paint beautiful watercolors of beaches, lighthouses, and ocean views. His family had planned to exhibit his artwork after his death, but the paintings mysteriously vanished. Hearing this, Catherine realizes that the paintings George claimed as his own were actually Henry's. Disgusted, she leaves the table and rushes to the bathroom. George follows her, trying to explain, but suddenly the bathroom lights begin flickering wildly. Later that night, George is shown sitting in his car with the engine running. A male spirit's voice speaks to him, saying it wants to help and urging him to free himself. The next morning, Eddie notices Catherine looking depressed and goes over to comfort her. Their emotions take over, and they end up kissing passionately on the ground. Meanwhile, George, anxious and desperate, joins Floyd on his boat to talk things over. He claims that his old college turned against him after he reported a sexual misconduct case, which is why Dr. Warren dislikes him. But Floyd is unmoved. He tells George that no matter the excuse, forging documents is a crime, and he must report it to HR. He makes it clear that George will be fired, leaving George devastated. Meanwhile, Justine is sitting in a cafe when she spots something familiar, a scarf she had knitted for George's mother. But to her shock, it's now wrapped around Willis's neck. That's when it clicks for her, George and Willis are having an affair. The scene shifts to nighttime. A completely soaked George shows up back on campus, looking shaken. Just then, Justine pulls up in her car and confronts him directly about his relationship with Willis. George, clearly irritated and tired of her questions, snaps at her and tells her to stay out of his business. Justine, unfazed, presses further and brings up his suspicious conversation with Dr. Warren at the museum. She doesn't wait for his answer and drives off, leaving George fuming and anxious. Later that night, Justine is driving alone down the highway. She notices that George is following her, and before she can react, he deliberately rams her car, causing a terrible crash. Back at home, Catherine tries to talk to George, likely to discuss divorce, but he cuts her off, saying he's not in the right state of mind to talk. After she leaves, George slumps down and begins speaking out loud to the male spirit that he believes is in their house. He asks the spirit to show a sign that it's really there. At that exact moment, a crow crashes through the window in Catherine's bedroom, startling her. George walks in, sees the broken window, and coldly tells her to ask her boyfriend to fix it, a sarcastic jab that shows his growing jealousy and bitterness. The next morning, Catherine quietly slips out of the house to go meet Justine. But instead of a meeting, she is stunned to learn that Justine has been in a serious car accident. The doctors say she's in a coma and may never wake up. As if that weren't enough, Catherine hears another devastating piece of news on the radio. Floyd has been found dead. His body was discovered floating in the Hudson River. At the college, George pretends to be shocked and saddened by Floyd's death. Because Floyd's position is now vacant, the school offers George the job of interim head of the art department. George quickly accepts, saying he'll do anything for the department. Later, while teaching, George is unsettled to see the cover image of Emanuel Swedenborg's book Heaven and Hell suddenly projected onto the classroom screen. He tries to change the slide, but the image won't go away. Panicking and feeling haunted, George snaps, he yells at his students and storms out of the classroom in a rage. When George comes home, he sees Catherine's suitcases packed inside her car, ready to go. Realizing she's planning to leave him, George pretends not to notice and offers her a protein shake. Catherine drinks it calmly, acting as if everything is normal. George then asks about Franny, and Catherine tells him she's already put her to bed. Suspicious, George rushes upstairs and finds Franny fully dressed but asleep. He tells Catherine it's a terrible time to travel. Terrified, Catherine runs downstairs to call for help, but George smashes the phone in anger. He drags her outside, removes her luggage from the car, and insists she can't take his daughter away. Furious, Catherine accuses him of being responsible for Floyd and Justine's fates. George denies everything and cruelly calls her unstable. Once he goes back inside, Catherine quickly reloads her luggage into the car. But soon, she begins to feel dizzy. George had spiked her protein shake earlier. Struggling to stay conscious, Catherine stumbles back into the house to find Franny. She calls out for Ella's spirit, who guides her upstairs. Catherine reaches Franny's room but finds it empty. Weak and desperate, she collapses on the bed while trying to dial the police. Ella's spirit comforts her, saying she wants to help, but then the male spirit, Calvin, appears and drags her away. Moments later, George enters the room sobbing and holding an axe. He hesitates, but Calvin's spirit pressures him, urging him to free himself. Ella's spirit, on the other hand, warns that those who follow evil will never win. Caught between grief and rage, George finally gives in and brutally kills Catherine while crying and screaming. The next morning, Cole arrives to babysit Franny and finds a note from George saying not to disturb Catherine because she's unwell. Later that evening, the film returns to its opening scene, George arriving home and pretending to discover Catherine's body. The police find his axe beside her and grow suspicious, but George claims he was teaching all day, which his colleagues confirm. With no solid evidence, the police let him go, and George moves in with his parents in Connecticut. Meanwhile, Justine is still in a coma, until Catherine and Ella's spirits appear to her, showing the truth about George. Justine's eyes snap open. Later, she calls George's parents' house and leaves a chilling message. She remembers everything. George listens in horror. While taking a shower, George hears Calvin's voice again, whispering that everything was Catherine's fault and that she was only holding him back. The spirit urges him to run away before it's too late. Panicked, George flees on his dead cousin Henry's boat. But as he sails, a violent storm breaks out. A bolt of lightning opens a fiery portal, and the spirits of Catherine and Ella appear, telling him that the gates of hell are only visible to those who are about to enter. George desperately tries to turn the boat around, but it's too late. The vessel drifts into the flames as his body disappears. Above him, an upside-down cross forms in the sky, just like the painting from Heaven and Hell. It's the final sign: George is damned.